Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about whether I should have bought an ND Miata instead of this. So let's get into it. So you're in the market for something lightweight, rear-wheel drive roadster that you can really push on the back roads without catching a felony. Here's what you have, S2000. Do I regret buying this over Miata? Not necessarily, let me explain it. So you and every other Japanese sports car fanatic probably shopped around for these. You go on Auto Tempest, you see decent conditions probably gets you like in the mid-20s, really mint conditions in the 30s to mid-30s. 15s to 20s, kind of a little bit on the higher mileage. You know, when you're at that price bracket, you can't help but compare it to something a little bit newer, like, you know, the ND Miata that comes with Apple CarPlay, probably still in warranty, has all those creature comforts. So $30,000 for basically a 20-year-old Japanese sports car really had me thinking, because when you're at that price bracket, there's so much options out there. I spent probably a month seriously debating on whether or not I pick this over the Miata. And you know, if you're in that situation, here's 3 questions you probably need to ask yourself. Now, I don't have an ND Miata to compare today. This is not your normal comparison video. I only have, 700 subscribers, still growing. So we're just gonna bear with this. So the first thing is you have to ask yourself, number one, what is your use case for this? Will this be your second or your third car? Are you going to take it on the track or just primarily back roads? Is this something you want to be like your lifelong restoration project and potentially your classic? For me, my use case with this car, you know, I'm in a pretty lucky position. I can have this as a third car, and I feel like as a third car, this thing is nearly perfect. If it were my second car and I had to commute a little bit more extra with this, probably would have gone with Miata, to be honest. Reason being is because when you have the ND Miata, you have more livable power, meaning that power is more so in the mid-range. You don't have to work so hard for it. You don't feel like you're racing everybody on the street just to get up to speed. Another thing too is when you have the top up in that Miata, it's not rattling everywhere. You don't feel so miserable. You don't feel like XYZ is going to fall apart versus something like this. You have a 20-year-old platform, suspension's a little bit older, soft top is just not as insulated compared to it. As a second car, it's probably going to be a little bit rough. You might get a little tired of it depending on, you know, what your age and tolerance is. But yeah, in my experience though, if you don't have a garage space for this, you're parking it outside and you live in Las Vegas, a car like this with not as much insulation is going to be baking once you get inside it. If this is something that you have to drive maybe 3 days out of the week, honestly, you should probably go with the ND Miata, because better NVH, better installation, you know, not only have Apple CarPlay, but the AC is probably working and really strong compared to a 20-year-old car like this. And then what I realized with having this car, if you're driving on the freeway or your commutes are, you know, more than 20, 30 plus minutes long, it gets really tiring. You know, if you have the top down, it's not as bad, but then you're cooking in the sun, so you get tired. When you have the top up, everything's rattling everywhere. The NVH is more accentuated with it. And then also too, the seats, I mean, with these seat covers that I have, which I can eventually replace, it's not as breathable. So I just feel like when you're in this car, it's just hotter, not as enjoyable when you're driving at midday. And then another thing too, if you're gonna use this as, a track car versus back road, you gotta think, 20-year-old car, yes, it has good aftermarket support, but there's more upkeep right off the bat. I feel like, you have a clutch to replace, brakes, all the fluids, suspension is probably tired, versus you get into a newer car like a Miata. In my opinion, I feel like it's just ready to go off the bat. Versus something like this, tires, brakes, clutch, flywheel, all the fluids has to be replaced before you even, can safely take it on the track. It being an older car, you're probably more likely to break down versus something newer like an ND Miata. Yes, Hondas are bulletproof, reliable, but still it's, a 20-year-old sports car, who knows how the previous owner has taken care of it. So just because it is a Honda doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have something just ready to go once you get it. But like I said, for me personally, if I needed something like a track car, I probably would feel safer with an ND Miata. I just feel like you don't have so many components that you need to replace right off the bat. And honestly, you probably feel a little bit more safer driving that one, pushing it harder versus the 20-year-old sports car. But if you're someone like me that just wants to enjoy it in the back roads, personally, I don't track. That's something that I wanted to get into. I just have too many expenses, too many life changes that came across first before I can even think about diving into another expensive hobby. So as a backroad car, for me, I feel like this is perfect. So nice little project car that you can kind of just restore little by little. For me, what this is more so like a lifelong restoration project. I kind of want to just hold on to it for the next 10 years, and then 10 years later this thing is looking and driving like brand new. That's my goal with this car. And then another thing you have to ask yourself when you're kind of shopping between the two, are you willing to take the risk on buying a 20-year-old sports car versus something like 4 to 5 years old like an ND Miata? When you're getting into something like this, I feel like you really have to gauge the owner. How much do they care for it? How well did they take care of it? Me personally, buying this car with 100,000+ miles through a third-party dealership that has no clue about the history of the car seems a little bit sketchy to me, versus if you get into something like an ND Miata with 30,000 miles, buying it from CarMax or Carvana, whoever, it's probably not that worrisome. Like I said, you're getting into an older car like this. In my opinion, when you're jumping into a project, you really have to kind of gauge the owner. Some people say you buy the owner, not the spec. And then for me, I kind of got really lucky with this. I'm buying from someone that held on to the car, really cared for it for the last 15 years. They did all of the right maintenance mods to it. They didn't spend all the money changing the wheels, adding more power, throwing a potato rocket in the back. So that's just something to kind of consider when you are comparing the two. If you're gonna buy it, if you're more likely to buy it third party, getting something higher mileage like this from those third party dealerships might be a little bit risky. So if you don't want to deal with any of that, that's where the ND Miata kind of comes at a win. And then probably the most question, in my opinion, to ask yourself is, which one have you dreamt of owning for the longest time? For me, it was the S2000. I've always wanted one all the way since high school. I grew up in a 2002 RSX Type S. If this is going to be something that you want to hold on for, a little bit more long-term, something that you can actually, tolerate, this is kind of why I went with the S2000. Not saying that the ND Miata isn't, a desirable car, but, for me personally, it's just something that I never really wanted. I see them out on the road, I appreciate them. They look really cool, but if I were to get that car, I feel like whenever I were to see these on the road, I would just be a little bit more jealous. And that's the thing, if you're spending so much money, on a car that's supposed to bring you all this happiness, that makes it worth the 20 to 30 grand that you're spending. In my opinion, I feel like you want to get a car that doesn't make you envious of others on the road. Something that you're just truly happy with long term. Something that you just get so excited to look at and you have so much fun just being in it. For me, that's what this S2000 has been to me. why do I like this car so much? One, it's because Honda will probably never make anything like this again. Rear-wheel drive, 6-speed, lightweight sports car that revs all the way up to 8 or 9,000 RPM. So that's exactly why I chose this. You know, this is the Ferrari to my RSX Type S. You know, it's something that I've always dreamt of owning. The fact that it's 20 years old and still looks this good, it's just so cool to see like an early 2000s Honda that has just been so cared for and it looks OEM all the way up until this day. You know, this is something that I just really want to kind of build up to OEM spec, and you know, I feel like Mazda will never kill off the Miata. Honda's a little bit of a different story. They're not so focused on these cars as much as Mazda is focused with the Miatas. So I just feel like whenever you do want a Miata, it won't be as hard trying to find a more decent mint condition versus something like this. You know, I was getting afraid that, you know, one day if I actually did want to get into it, it'd probably be a little bit too, you know, out of my price range. I don't want to be spending 40, 45 grand for a 20-year-old sports car. To me, I'm just not at that point in my life yet. So why do I prefer this over an ND Miata? Well, number one, I'm not going to use it on the track. This is just more so like a lifelong restoration project that, you know, I kind of want to build up to OEM spec. Number two, it's just, in my opinion, you know, this car is just a little bit more special to me, not only because it has that, you know, naturally aspirated 8,000 RPM revving VTEC engine and probably one of the best manual gearboxes you can get into, but it's just the fact that, you know, Honda doesn't make anything like this anymore versus something like the Miata. You know, Mazda is so married to that car, they'll never get rid of it, in my opinion. You know, if you think about it, 5-10 years later, you want to jump into that platform, it probably won't be as hard because I feel like they're just a little bit more available versus 10 years later trying to find a more mint condition like this. A little bit of a different story. So yeah, that's about it for today's video. Just to kind of recap what we talked about, 3 things you need to ask yourself. 1, what is your use case for this car? Is it going to be your second or third? Are you going to take it on the track or just back roads? And then number 2, you know, are you willing to take on the risk of buying a 20-year-old sports car? When you're in a situation like that, you really have to gauge the owner to see how well they've taken care of it. And then lastly too, which of the 2 have you always dreamt of owning? You know, if you're someone like me that grew up with Hondas, this has always been the end goal for me. But if you've been in the Miata community, you know, if that's something that you always wanted, it's pretty cool how they designed it and what it is today. So yeah, that's about it for today's video. No, I don't regret buying this over an ND Miata. Let me know what you guys think. Am I still stuck in a honeymoon phase? Were you in my similar situation? And do you think I made a mistake buying an older sports car for more than 20 grand? Should I have gotten the ND Miata? Share your thoughts. I'll see you guys on the next one.